please subscribe to my channel and like the stream, like the videos that I make from the stream. And also click that bell when you subscribe so you get notified when my new videos drop and when I go live again. Before we get into it though, I wanted to talk a little bit about a fun transit happening in just a few days. Well, November the 24th, we have Mars, right? Mars, our master of malice and mayhem, entering the wise and wild sign of Sagittarius, right? And Mars is going to stay there until, what, January 5th or something like that. We should look at this on the chart. Today's the 20th. And you can see Mars right here, right? Very close to the end of Scorpio. And then we see the 23rd. And then the 24th, look, he edges in to Sagittarius, right? And this is, see, when Mars enters a new sign, it's really interesting to me because, you know, Mars hangs around for a while. Mars's cycle is like, 2 years, right? So it is sort of momentous. Now, he was in a sign that he ruled before. And so we're going to take a look at your horoscopes, right, for this fun occasion. And talk a little bit about what it means for you, for me, for us. Well, so let's take a look quickly, please. Just humor me, because this is important. So what's Mars mean in astrology? Mars is conflict and competition. Mars is violence, right? We also see Mars representing pain and injuries, illnesses and enemies. He's our passion and our drive, isn't he? He goes after what he wants, right? He's the active side of desire. Strength and will, right? He's courageous and valiant. In short, though, he's the guy who stirs up trouble in whatever house he finds himself in. So it's something, to be aware of. Well, what about Sagittarius? And if you follow me, that Sag gets a lot of its meaning from its ruling planet, Jupiter. So Sag is known for both its wisdom and its wildness. So for those of you who don't know, who aren't familiar, when I say Sag, right, it's an abbreviation for Sagittarius because we have so many syllables. Sagittarius. And I even add an additional syllable. Sagittarius, right? It's like iambic pentameter. Sagittarius. Anyway, if Shakespeare was into astrology, right? Anyway, now I'm just being stupid. But the thing about Sagittarius, we often see it associated with depth, right? Understanding and philosophy, as well as with optimism, right? Enjoyment and partying, right? Partying. It's so funny. I joke around like, hey, Sag, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Or like, yo, Sag, put that tent away. You're just crashing on my couch. This ain't Burning Man, right? So, anyway, they like to, they like to wander around. It's a mutable sign, Both Jupiter-ruled signs, right? That's Pisces and Sagittarius. They get a bad rap for partying too hard, don't they? Right? They do. Consuming too many party favors, perhaps. Both are also mutable signs, right? So they get known for being flighty or non-committal. But Sag is also a fire sign. And therefore, in philosophical, right, with a philosophical Jupiter-ruled sign, it can be a bit fanatic, right? Fanatics. Perhaps it's like the hypocritical preacher who doesn't practice what they preach. I've been guilty. I've been guilty. I'm like, this is what we should always do. And then then I don't do it. Well, Pisces is like Jupiter turned inward, right? While Sag is like Jupiter turned outward. And we talk about, various signs acting as this, acting in this role for different planets, right? For example, we talked about Mars in Aries being Mars turned outward, while Mars in Scorpio is Mars turned inward. Or Mercury in Gemini is Mercury turned outward, while Mercury in Virgo is Mercury turned inward. So it's interesting, we see that sort of pattern repeat. You see? So Pisces is like the dreamy or passive Jupiter, while Sag is like the penetrating and active Jupiter. Pisces receives impressions while Sagittarius actively seeks them out. Well, and if you follow me, you also know that the signs get their meanings from their place in the solar cycle. And Sagittarius also gets a lot of its meaning from this placement. And there's some interesting stuff right here. So where is Sagittarius in the cycle of a year? Well, it's right after Scorpio, isn't it? In Scorpio, the nights first dominate the days, right? In the northern hemisphere. So by the time we get to Sagittarius season, we've more or less gotten used to the longer nights, right? And sometimes we turn those longer nights to our advantage, don't we? So Sagittarius may get some of that optimism from Jupiter and being Jupiter ruled. But it's also interesting to note that this is the time of year that we call the holidays, right? Including Christmas. But this time of year has been the holidays for thousands of years, right? One of the predecessors to Christmas was an ancient Mesopotamian festival called, please excuse the pronunciation, I don't know how to say this, but Zagmuk. Zagmuk? Z-A-G-M-U-K. Zagmuk. And this was an ancient Mesopotamian holiday which literally translates to New Year, right? It was held in December. And observers would feast for 12 days. 12 days. The 12 days of Christmas, right? 12th day of Christmas. Sounds sort of reminiscent, doesn't it? Well, this particular holiday celebrates the victory of their head god, Marduk, right? Who was the sort of the lead of the pantheon of ancient Babylon. In his own struggle over the forces of primordial chaos. And they were embroiled in a battle, which, according to mythology, lasted for 12 days, right? So the 12 days of Christmas could go back to ancient Babylon, for all we know. So, it's no wonder that I consider Sag maybe getting some of its optimism and merriment from the fact that it was the time leading up to Zagmuk. It's also where we, that time of year where we approach the final stage of the dark cycle, right? The waning cycle of the year, when the sun is traveling southwards towards the winter solstice, right? And the winter solstice was that time of death and decay. So why should Sag season be optimistic at all? Well, because following the winter solstice, the light begins to wax again. This is when the sun begins to move northwards once again, increasing in light towards the spring equinox, which is the time of rebirth associated with Easter and Ostar. I don't know how to pronounce that. I don't know much about those Sabbaths, but you know what I'm saying. And eventually the summer solstice, when we emerge into the fullness of light once again, right? So what about Mars in Sag, though? What is Mars in Sag? What does it mean? Can be really fun, can't it? They really know how to party. My bestie, my BFF Anne, she has this and she's super fun. She said I could mention her name. She's very fun. On dates, They can be a little forward, right? I joke sometimes that I'm not going to argue with Sagittarius Mars, especially when they have their hands down my panties. You see? I mean, it's happened before several times. So, Mars expresses himself through both active and mutable energy here, doesn't he? He can be a bit unhinged. He can go too far enjoying himself. He has conflicting motives and desires, frequently changing his mind, doesn't he? He's flighty and tends to leave as soon as he arrives. Right? It's like the wandering uncle that shows up to, holiday dinner, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, he's gone. On the motorcycle. I don't know, I made that up, but you see what I'm saying. Mars in the sign of philosophy, right? Sagittarius, can get aggressive about what he believes in his worldview. I think of fanatical preachers, right? Who only see their way. This is the right way. Until they change, right? Until their way changes and becomes a different way. You see, the mutable thing. Then that's the right way after they change their minds. They tend to be the moral police. They often have a lot to say about how we should live our lives. But then they never do the same thing. They don't follow their own advice. Once again, me. I have a Sagittarius Jupiter opposite, my Mars and Sun. So, I do a lot of this nonsense. They can also be positively idealistic, though, as in champions for causes. They often have a keen sense of what's right, even if they don't do it. They have the energy and passion to achieve goals, especially idealistic ones. Though, they have to be a little careful about overestimating themselves sometimes. So being honest and cautious about themselves. I also think of people, who stick up for their friends, who are passionate defenders of those who they care about and that which they believe in. Now, I thought we could look at some celebrity examples really quickly of Mars and Sagittarius and how that may look, right? And we've talked about, partying too much or enjoying the party favors too much. So a couple people that came up were Matthew Perry, who recently passed away. Remember, he was the star of the hit TV show Friends. Very talented actor. And he struggled with addiction issues, didn't he? According to his own autobiography, he attended over 6,000 Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and entered rehab 15 times. That's according to CNN. Poor baby. Well, and then there was Janis Joplin, one of the most amazing musicians and singers that we remember from history of the 1960s especially. Extremely talented and creative. She also struggled with a heroin addiction, which eventually took her life. And she entered the so-called 27 Club, right? Those are people who passed at the age of 27. Like, we have Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, and Kurt Cobain. Well, and then some brighter examples. We have Rihanna. She's the famous singer who needs no introduction, right? Rihanna. We could talk about her partying, and there's some fun articles I found about that. But what's more interesting to me is her idealism in championing causes. Because she even established a foundation named after her grandmother, I believe, called the Clara Lionel Foundation. Its purpose is dedicated to fighting for basic rights in education and health. Very admirable causes. And in that same vein, Jennifer Lopez, right? A famous actress who also needs no introduction. My favorite movie of hers is The Cell. Very creepy film. Kind of scary. But the most beautiful imagery and cinematography. It's very, very cool. But instead of talking about her behind, I want to mention her Lopez Family Foundation. She and her sister established it to help mothers and children access medical care. I mean, goodness, what's more admirable than that? Well, finally, I wanted to mention Carl Gustav Jung, another Mars in Sagittarius, one of the founding fathers of modern psychology, and the founder of analytical psychology. He was very famous because he brought a Jupiterian and philosophical approach to psychology. He focused on the notion of archetypes, and he was famously quite interested in astrology. Well, and just briefly, some sort of events that we see correlate with this transit. We often see religious or ideological conflicts. For example, October of 2012, a Taliban gunman shot the famous Afghan women's rights activist Malala Yousafzai. She was shot 3 times, right? Because of her activism, because of her championing things like women's rights and freedom of education, which was frowned on in her situation. It's interesting because just 2 years later, in 2014, Malala was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize while Mars was in Sagittarius, right? So that was kind of cool. Then I marked that on March 5th, 2016, it was Super Tuesday, which is the biggest day of the primary election season in the United States. And this is when Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders both famously won 2 primaries. And Hillary Clinton only won 1. Sort of a prelude to how 2016 would go, you know. Now, unfortunately, we also tend to see a lot of terrorist attacks. And I didn't want to enumerate them all here. But we do see things like bombings and you know what I'm talking about. So this time around, I'm a little concerned. I don't think you have to be psychic to predict more religious and sectarian violence, right? Ideologically motivated attacks, bombings, etc. I also think there is going to be an escalation of other nations getting involved in Gaza. Now, Mars, on the other hand, will be touring the United States' first house. So this will undoubtedly bring a sharpening of the divide in the American public when it comes to the subject of Gaza. And it already has been getting pretty divided. And unfortunately, this could lead to a difficult electoral situation for the 2024 presidential election in the United States. Well, anyway, you don't want to hear about that. What you want to hear about is horoscopes. You want to hear your horoscopes, right? So let's talk about what this means for you. I'm going to do horoscopes for Mars entering Sagittarius based on rising signs. So if you don't know your rising sign, I really suggest you find it out. You would need your birth time, of course, and run it through a reputable app. I always recommend astro.com, of course. But otherwise, I mean, you could watch this for your sun sign. It's just way more interesting for your rising. Well, first of all, Aries Rising. Well, here, let's go ahead. We got to show it on the chart, don't we? We got to show it on the chart. So Aries Rising. You see, Mars just left the 8th house and of, losses and stuff like that, and entered the 9th house of your beliefs and your worldview. So you may have had some setbacks, like financial losses, or maybe accrued some debt. Hopefully this eases up, and now you're going to be a bit of a fanatic, right? You see, you need to watch yourself around Thanksgiving meals, because you're going to be itching for an argument probably. And your passion will be up at level 11, right? Our ramps go up to 11, right? 11. It's good to be passionate, but sometimes conflicts will show you gaps in your own understanding, and you might lose, you might lose some face when it comes to your arguments in debates. Well, how about Taurus Rising? So for Taurus Rising, Mars is leaving the 7th house, right? And entering the 8th. That's the 7th house of relationships and the 8th house of losses. So conflicts in relationships could have happened, right? Oftentimes we do. We have, we get into fights or whatever with our partners. And these could lead to financial losses. Sometimes schisms in relationships can lead to having to shell out money, right? To pay some sort of restitution, sometimes to an ex. It could be somewhat positive too, as in sharing your money with your partner, right? If that's the next step in your relationship, but watch out. That can go bad as well. Be careful, right? Because Mars in the 8th house often signals vengeance or feelings of vengeance, right? And they will waste your energy on negative emotions. And remember to be careful about accruing debt during this if you can. It's best to save for rainy days because Mars in the 8th house can bring precipitation. Well, what about our Gemini Rising friends? Let's go to Gemini Rising. Now, Mars is leaving the 6th house of illness and obligations and entering the 7th house of relationships. So, hopefully you got a bunch of stuff done. But you may have been so focused on handling business that you neglected a partner. And now they're miffed. You could be having some arguments pop up with your partner or spouse. It could feel like they're being antagonistic to you and fighting you this whole way, right? But it's an opportunity to communicate and work out the underlying causes of these conflicts. Some people just break up, right? And maybe that's the right thing to do, but don't be hasty if you can help it. See if you can get to the root of problems, with your Gemini sense of inquiry. Well, what about our Cancer Rising homies? So for Cancer Rising, my BFF has Cancer Rising. So this means Mars is leaving the 5th house of children and pleasure and entering the 6th house of illness and obligations. I bet your kids were a pain in the ass, weren't they? Either that or you just wanted to have fun. Oh, girls just want to have fun. Oh, girls just want to have. That's all they really want. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. Now it's time to buckle down, though, and take care of things that you've been avoiding. I bet there are many. This is time to follow through on obligations, but be careful. You could easily get sick or injured during this time. So please get enough sleep and nutrition. Well, what about our Leo Rising homies? Our Leo Rising friends. Leo Rising. So Mars is leaving your 4th house, right, of home and origins, and entering your 5th house of kids and fun. So, were your parents being a pain? Did you have conflicts around your living situation? Maybe with landlords or roommates? Maybe you were just a tyrant around the home. You set up the chore wheel, didn't you? Like, this is the chore wheel. When you get here, this is what you do. Not that chore wheels are bad, but usually you make chore wheels when you've gotten fed up, right, with your roommates. So, unfortunately now, though, your kids are going to be tyrants around the home. They could be unruly or just seem to fight you every step of the way. And if you don't have kids, or even if you do, the itch to get out and have fun will eclipse your better judgment. This often brings a strong desire to have fun and pleasure and, physical relations, that sort of thing. But what about our Virgo Rising friends? So for Virgo Rising, Mars is leaving the third house of siblings and local community and entering the fourth house of parents and home. So I bet you had your fair share of road rage, didn't you? Or maybe you yell at service people, or I don't know, conflicts during errands, you see? I hope you didn't have a car accident, because that does happen too. Now, your home is the new scene for conflicts, and you'll probably want everything your way. We often get into it with our parents too, if they're still around, you know? They often seem judgy or at odds with your happiness in life. So, tell them to direct their complaints to the nearest wall behind them. The wall will listen. On the other hand, they'll watch out for conflicts around your living situation, because sometimes we see, rents rise, or we get upset about the property rules and regulations or whatever. Well, let's move on to Libra Rising. Pardon me. So, yeah, Amber is Libra Rising. She wanted me to make sure to let you all know that she's Libra Rising. Just so everyone knows, Amber is the Libra Rising. Amber. Amber is Libra Rising, my helper here. Amber. Just so you know, Amber. Libra Rising. Sorry, Amber. I thought it was funny. She wanted me to make sure that I let everyone know. Anyway, so Mars is leaving the second house, right, of money, and entering the third house of siblings and community. Pardon, it's getting so hot in here. See, I turn on the heater, but then I get hot with all these lights. With all these lights, Lights, camera, anger. Anyway, so now Amber, what has she been going through? So maybe you've been a bit of a shopaholic. Huh? Mars in the second house. Hopefully you didn't spend too much money. But now you need to mind your anger around town. And this is why we often see road rage, and conflicts during errands and commutes, right? So I mentioned yelling at shopkeepers or staff, stores, and also on your way into work. You may have also noticed antagonisms come up between you and a sibling. That often happens. Either way, though, you'll be tempted to use really angry words, right? The third house does have something to do with communication. So, while this is happening, do your best to speak before you think. Think before you speak. Yeah. Anyway. Well, let's talk about our Scorpio Rising friends. Scorpio Rising friends. So Mars is leaving the first house, right? Of self, and entering the second house of your stuff. So hopefully you didn't hurt yourself too much, right? During this transit. It's funny because the image popped in my head of, Monty Python's Knights of the Holy Grail. And there's that one knight who inadvertently, chops off his limbs while he's trying to fight, right? He's like, I'll take you, I'll get you. Anyway, that's for nerds. I also joke, right, that Scorpio types, they'll cut off their nose if it will spite your face, right? That's Scorpio's commitment to revenge. Anyway. Now you're probably going to be tempted to spend money, right? Sometimes it's just for your own pleasure and desire, but other times it's on necessities. Right now, though, it's like you're being tested on your budgeting skills. You see? And remember that the universe settles all accounts. But what about our Sagittarius Rising friends? Well, Mars is leaving the 12th house of isolation and mental health, right? And entering the first house of self. So, you poor baby. This was depressing, wasn't it? You probably felt an agonizing need to suffer in silence. But the mute button no longer works, does it? Now you can't be silenced. You'll likely feel a renewed sense of energy and potency. You must be careful though, because you will likely have a tendency to use this energy, right? As in rushing around. Not paying attention or pushing yourself too hard can result in injuries. And you'll want to take care of yourself because Mars often brings scrapes, bruises, cuts, and burns. So be careful around the kitchen. I always say this. I say, watch the knife. Keep your eyes on the knife and on the stove. Okay? Take care while doing dangerous tasks. Anyway, so what about our Capricorn Rising friends? Don't worry, we're almost done. Chill out. I'm not even looking at the chat right now, so relax. Amber says, you love me. Yes, I love you, Amber. I tell you all the time I love you. Even when I'm mad at you, I still love you. I still love you, Amber. Even when I'm mad at you, I still love you. Well, so anyway, our Capricorn Rising friends, this means Mars is leaving what? The 11th house of hopes and friends and entering the 12th house of isolation and mental health. So hopefully you didn't alienate yourself from your homies too much, because we often get into fights with our friends over silly things. I need to remember that for when Mars goes into, for me, anyway. For me, because it's going into my 11th house. But we'll get to that. So anyway, you probably feel quite drained from drama and just want to be left alone. Things will feel tedious, right? Especially other people. Other people will feel tedious. We often have mental health crises, or we just get very mean to ourselves, right? You know, we don't even need enemies during this sort of transit because we act as our own, right? It's the house of self-undoing, and we actively thwart our own success. We often have, this is an important time to remember who we are and what our life goals are, because that's what gives us a little bit of light during this isolating thing. We can use these sorts of isolating transits in order to put things back in perspective. You know, what is it that I really want and really want to do, right? Have some focus. Well, now let's go to Aquarius Rising. This is me and my homies. Oops, Aquarius Rising. So Mars is leaving our 10th house of life direction, right? And entering the 11th house of hopes and friends, right? So did we have conflicts with authority? I mean, I usually tend to anyway, you know. I'm just that kind of person. I know I did, right? Did you act out of turn? Or break the rules? Did you get in fights with bosses? Those are typical things that happen too. Now, you'll likely be carrying that over to your social life. Your sense of idealism could likely lead you to fights with your friends or people who support you. It's also very important you don't alienate yourself from people who really do add to your life, right? And this is something that I'm trying to be aware of because I have lots of new friends, you know, and sometimes I act a fool and I say stupid stuff and, you know, do stupid things. And so I'm going to try and be on my best behavior so I don't alienate myself from people, right? Who do care about me and who, you know, do support, especially when when you've recently met people, things are less stable and more shaky. So anyway, we just have to do our best, don't we? So again, remember to think before you speak and respect other people's autonomy. So if you want something, ask for it. Always be sure to ask. And make sure everything's very clear. Well, what about our Pisces Rising friends? So Mars is leaving the ninth house of beliefs and, worldview and all that fun stuff, and entering the 10th house of life direction and career and all these sorts of things. So now you may have been having fights with family and friends and everyone around you, ideological debates perhaps, right? Because usually here it's like, right. We get very passionate about what we believe. And hopefully you didn't, get yourself into too much trouble, because now you're going to be amped up from all this sort of idealism, and you may be getting in fights with your bosses or other authority figures. You see, likely we've gotten a lot more passionate about things that we value. And these can carry over into the workplace, where we're going to really value our autonomy. And we might feel a big sense of competition, maybe with our coworkers, but also with our bosses. Sometimes, we're going for the same job or whatever, and then we say lots of, I'm gonna get you, and I'm gonna, like the dudes at UFC fights and stuff, they sit there like staring each other down and like talking crap. I'm gonna do this to you, I'm gonna do that to you. I mean, basically it sounds like dirty talk, but, anyway, it's kind of like that. And you don't want to get embroiled in those sorts of struggles that are going to put you in worse stead later. So pick your battles. But anyway, so thank you for watching all that about horoscopes and Mars entering Sagittarius. It's important stuff. Now we'll look at live chart readings in your specific charts.